Okay, so today I want to discuss something that the analytical class has systematically refused to confront. And the reason for that refusal is precisely why you need to understand it. 7 countries right now, as you watch this, are in the process of genuine civilizational collapse. Not metaphorical decline, not the kind of slow decay that economists euphemistically call structural adjustment. I mean real institutional unraveling, demographic hemorrhage, the withdrawal of mass legitimacy from the state apparatus itself. And I want to be transparent with you from the outset. The first country on this list will shock you precisely because it violates the foundational mythology of the liberal international order. This is Professor Jiang insight, where power shifts are decoded before the headlines catch up. Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay locked in, because understanding what I'm about to show you will reshape how you see the world order collapsing in real time. Let me explain what we're actually looking at. What appears to be sudden collapse is always the final chapter of a very long book. Every empire, every state, every system that has ever failed gave decades of warning signals before the rupture. The problem is that most people are not reading the book. They are watching a highlight reel. And highlight reels do not show you the rot in the foundation. The patterns were always there. They are always there. The question is whether you are trained to see them. Okay, let's begin with France. Not Syria, not Venezuela, not some peripheral African nation. France, the 5th largest economy in the world, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, a nuclear-armed state, a founding member of the European Union. France is entering a phase of political and social decomposition that by any serious historical metric qualifies as pre-collapse. 3 consecutive governments unable to complete their mandates without emergency powers. A pension reform that triggered the largest sustained street mobilization since 1968, not for weeks, but for months. An agricultural sector in open revolt. A police force that has in certain suburban territories effectively ceded operational control to parallel power structures. A bond market that is quietly, politely, but unmistakably beginning to price in political risk in ways it has not done since the 1990s. And an electoral landscape so fragmented that the concept of a governing majority has become nearly theoretical. Now, I want to be clear. I am not saying France is about to collapse tomorrow. I am saying that the diagnostic framework we apply to Pakistan or Peru, the framework that identifies state fragility, elite capture, institutional decay, we refuse to apply to France because France carries the symbolic weight of the Enlightenment, of liberté, égalité, fraternité. That double standard is not just intellectually dishonest, it is dangerous because it means the warning signs go unread until it is too late to course correct. Let me shift now to the second collapse, which is instructive in a different way. Ethiopia. As recently as 2019, it was receiving the Nobel Peace Prize. Its prime minister was celebrated as a transformational leader, a visionary who had ended a decades-long conflict and was ushering his country into democratic openness. 2 years later, one of the worst civil wars of the 21st century was consuming the country's northern regions. Hundreds of thousands were dead, millions were displaced. What happened? Nothing happened that wasn't already visible in 2019 to anyone who looked past the Nobel narrative. Ethiopia is a federation of deeply distinct ethnic, linguistic, and regional communities held together not by genuine civic integration, but by elite bargains and historically by authoritarian force. When the force was relaxed, when the liberalization that earned the Nobel Prize loosened the mechanisms of central control, the underlying centrifugal forces did not disappear. They accelerated because they had never been resolved. They had only been suppressed. This is the pattern of every federal state that has tried to manage ethnic pluralism through top-down political theater rather than genuine structural accommodation. Yugoslavia, the Soviet Union. The lesson that political scientists have documented since the 1990s. Okay, now let me address Pakistan, the third country on this list. The collapse here is unfolding across three simultaneous axes: fiscal, military, and political legitimacy. Pakistan has been in and out of IMF programs for 70 years. This is not a temporary liquidity problem. This is a structural condition in which the state cannot generate sufficient revenue to fund basic functions because the elite that controls the state has successfully exempted itself from taxation for generations. The military consumes a disproportionate share of public resources and is not accountable to civilian oversight. The agricultural sector operates under feudal land arrangements that systematically impoverish the rural poor while enriching landlords who dominate the legislature. Add to this the political crisis unleashed by the arrest of a former prime minister with genuine mass following, the subsequent crackdown on civil society and media, the open rift between civilian political institutions and the military establishment. You have a state in which the basic mechanisms of legitimacy, elections, rule of law, peaceful transfer of power, have been so thoroughly compromised that large segments of the population have simply stopped believing in them. A state can survive many things. It cannot survive the mass withdrawal of legitimacy belief. When enough of the educated middle class, enough of the youth, enough of the business community decide the system is not reformable from within, what remains is immigration, radicalization, or passive withdrawal. All three are happening in Pakistan simultaneously and at scale. Let me dwell on Ukraine for a moment, the fourth collapse. Not because Ukraine is losing militarily. The military picture remains contested. Ukraine is collapsing in a more fundamental sense, demographically and institutionally. The demographic losses from this war, killed, wounded, displaced abroad, internally displaced, represent a generational hemorrhage from which no reconstruction plan, however generously funded, can simply recover. A country is not its GDP. A country is its people, their relationships, their institutional memory, their capacity to reproduce social trust across generations. The reconstruction of Ukraine will face a paradox that the architects of the Marshall Plan never confronted. The thing you are trying to rebuild, the human substrate of a functioning society, has been scattered across 30 countries and will not simply return because the shooting stops. People who have rebuilt their lives in Germany, Poland, and Canada do not come home because a peace agreement is signed. They come home slowly, selectively, and only if the conditions they return to are meaningfully better than the conditions they left. Creating those conditions requires exactly the human capital that has immigrated. This is the trap. And very few people in the rooms where reconstruction is being planned are talking honestly about it. Okay, the fifth, sixth, and seventh collapses are geographically diverse, but analytically connected by a single thread: the end of the commodity supercycle that sustained them and the absence of any alternative economic foundation built during the years of abundance. Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa, the largest economy on the continent, the investment banker's favorite African growth story for 20 years, is now in the middle of a currency crisis, a fuel subsidy collapse, security fragmentation across multiple regions. The political class is so thoroughly captured by oil rents that it has no institutional memory of how to govern a post-oil economy because it has never had to. The oil is not gone, but the oil is no longer sufficient. A state built entirely around the distribution of oil revenue has no architecture for anything else. Argentina, always Argentina, the country that has defaulted on its sovereign debt more times than any other in modern history. As of this moment, it is engaged in its most radical experiment yet: a deliberately ideologically driven demolition of the state apparatus that, whatever its theoretical merits, is producing social dislocations that the Argentine political system may not be able to absorb. And Bangladesh, which the development community cited as one of the great success stories of the past 30 years. Genuine poverty reduction, genuine improvements in maternal health and female education, a garment sector that lifted millions into the formal economy. Bangladesh is now navigating a post-autocratic transition after the fall of a 15-year government with an economy that is more fragile than the headline numbers suggest. Let me ask you a question. What connects all 7 of these? What is the thread? It is this. Every single one of these states was built on a foundation that was always temporary, a commodity boom, an authoritarian bargain, a geopolitical subsidy, a development narrative that papered over structural weaknesses. And every single one of them failed to use the window of apparent stability to build the institutions, the civic culture, the diversified economy, the genuine social contract that would have made them resilient when the temporary foundation shifted. The window always closes. The commodity boom ends. The geopolitical patron loses interest. The authoritarian strongman dies or is removed. The development narrative meets reality. And when the window closes, what is left is the foundation. And if the foundation was never built, what is left is rubble dressed up in the language of statehood. Now, I want you to understand something. This is not pessimism. Pessimism would be saying that nothing can be done. What I am saying is something more uncomfortable than pessimism, that the things that could be done are already known, have been known for decades, are documented in the literature of development economics and comparative politics and institutional design. The reason they are not done is not ignorance, it is politics. It is the short-term horizons of elected officials and military strongmen. It is the vested interests of elites who benefit from the dysfunction. It is the complicity of an international system that finds it easier to manage collapse than to prevent it. Because prevention requires accountability and management requires only money. Stay with me because this is where it gets very interesting. The international order is not yet reckoned with the scale of what is unfolding. When 7 countries of this scale, spanning continents, spanning development levels, spanning political systems, all exhibit the same diagnostic pattern: temporary foundations, institutional decay, elite capture, the withdrawal of mass legitimacy, you are not looking at isolated crises. You are looking at a systemic breakdown. And the institutions designed to manage such breakdowns, the IMF, the World Bank, the regional development banks, the diplomatic apparatus, were all designed for a world in which collapse was the exception. They are now facing a world in which it is becoming the pattern. The architecture cannot hold. History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes. And right now, it is rhyming very loudly. I'm Professor Jiang. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and never mistake a quiet news cycle for the absence of history being made.